Today on Alex and Autos, we're out here in the forest taking a look at the 2015 Chevy Trax. This is the close sister ship to the Buick Encore, which we have seen in the US for a few years. This is a subcompact crossover vehicle. So this is not competing with the CR-V or the RAV4 or Chevy's own Equinox. This is meant to compete in the next size category down. This category is where you'll find things like the Jeep Renegade, which is also new, the brand new Honda HR-V, the Nissan Juke, which has been around for a little bit, and of course the Kia Soul. The Kia Soul is probably the most different in this bunch because the Soul at this moment is only available in front-wheel drive trim, and it starts a decent amount less than most of these other entries. We know that Kia will be adding all-wheel drive to the Soul, we just don't know when that will be, and when they do, that will make it a more direct competitor to the rest of the entries. General Motors has styled the Trax very much like the rest of the Chevy crossover family, with the same sort of front end going on. This is very, very vertical, so there is no separate bumper going on up front. We do have optional fog lights available in certain models. Some have called the front end look a little bit boring, a little bit plain. This is closely related to the Opel Mokka as well as the Buick Encore. They're really just reskinned versions of one another, and I think that the Buick Encore is the most attractive entry in my mind. Now, some people have called the Buick Encore a little bit cartoonish, but I actually think that's a good thing for that vehicle. It's small, it's cute, it comes across as cute and fun. This subcompact crossover segment can also be seen as an alternative to your average subcompact hatchback. So you could definitely look at this instead of something like a Mazda 2 hatchback or a Ford Fiesta hatchback, or perhaps even a Mazda 3 hatchback or a Ford Focus hatchback. At 167.2 inches long, this is definitely shorter than something like a CR-V or a Toyota RAV4. In fact, this is 20 inches shorter than the Chevy Equinox, even though it looks kind of like the Chevy Equinox's Mini-Me. At that length, the Trax and the Encore are among the longest in their immediate segment. You can definitely see some of the reason for buying this over your average subcompact hatchback because we have a much taller roof. The taller roof in the Trax continues towards the rear, and even though it does decline a little bit, it doesn't decline as rapidly as some of those subcompact hatchbacks out there. Even though we have higher ground clearance than your average subcompact hatchback, the overall body height is definitely taller. Increased ground clearance and available all-wheel drive are generally why you'd buy a crossover like this instead of a traditional hatchback of the same size. That's definitely going on for the Trax and the Encore when you compare these with General Motors' other hatchbacks. We definitely have a lot of ground clearance going on in the Trax and the Encore, but we have this three-piece front bumper which does limit the front end clearance just a little bit. We have the painted portion right here, we have a blacked out portion lower than that, and then we have a rubber portion right down here. Now, bringing the front bumper down this far improves fuel economy because it improves the aerodynamics of the vehicle. However, this rubber portion of the front bumper is not necessarily higher than most of those subcompact hatches out there. However, if you take the rubber bottom of that front bumper off, you can enjoy all of the ground clearance available in the Trax. You just won't get the same fuel economy on the highway. The styling on the rear of the Trax is relatively plain, but that's what we've come to expect from Chevy and their crossovers. We have tail lamps that are just here on the body. They don't wrap onto the rear of the vehicle. That makes the rear hatch a little bit smaller than you'd find otherwise. All models have the sort of faux spoiler wrapping around right here that contains the center-mounted brake light and the standard backup camera, which is a nice high position, so it's easier to see things that are closer to your bumper. There's only one engine and one transmission available in the Trax and the Encore. It is this 1.4-liter four-cylinder engine. It produces 138 horsepower and 148 pound-feet of torque. You'll notice that in some of the other Chevys this engine is used in, we have an overboost feature, but it's not available in this particular model, so 148 pound-feet is all you get. This engine is mated only to a 6-speed automatic transmission. There's no manual transmission like you'll find in the HR-V, the Soul, or the Jeep Renegade. However, thanks to the light curb weight and that small turbocharged engine, fuel economy comes in relatively high at 29 miles per gallon average for the front-wheel drive model that we're testing here, and 27 miles per gallon average for the all-wheel drive model. Now, you may notice a little bit of a difference in real-world fuel economy between the Trax and the Buick Encore, but that's due largely to the fact that the Encore has wider tires. I'm going to give front seat comfort 7 out of 10 points. This does rank about the same as the base Kia Soul. We do have a two-way power adjustable lumbar support, but the rest of the seat motions are manual. We also have a tilt telescopic steering column with a small range of motion. The base seats in the Honda HR-V as well as the Jeep Renegade are a little bit more comfortable, as are the seats in the Buick Encore. Rear seat comfort comes in at 8 out of 10 points. These rear seats are more comfortable than you might expect for a vehicle of this size. The seat bottom cushion is a little bit close to the floor, which would make this more comfortable for children, a little bit less comfortable for adults. But I do have quite a bit of headroom right here, about 2 inches or so on this side. I also have about 3 inches of legroom sitting right here behind myself. Moving over to the right side, you can see I have an awful lot of legroom because I have this front seat folded down. This may sound a little bit silly in a vehicle like this, but there is a practical application. If you plan on putting a rearward-facing child seat in this vehicle, most vehicles in this category would not have enough room between the front seat back and the back seat back, but you will over here on the passenger side if you fold down that front passenger seat, put the child seat right here, and then you can still carry two other people in the vehicle. Just jam them right here in the middle and right over here on this side. One of the other reasons that you'd buy a crossover vehicle like this instead of a traditional hatchback is definitely the cargo carrying capacity. Because the body of the Trax is taller than you'll find in your average sort of hatchback-like vehicle, we get more cargo room back here. We have a 26-inch roller bag and a 24-inch roller bag. You can see they'll fit in this position behind the rear seats very easily. You can also fit the 24-inch roller bag or the 26-inch roller bag in this upright position under this tonneau cover and still close the hatch. Another nice touch is that this hatch is actually about 2 inches above my head, which means it's a lot easier for taller people to insert things or remove things from the cargo area without bopping their head. As you'd expect from a crossover vehicle, we have some convenient cargo additions like these D-ring tie downs right there. They're fairly sturdy. Grocery bag holders right up here. On the passenger side of the vehicle, we have a compartment that actually closes like that. I'm not sure what you'd put in there. On the other side of the cargo area, we have a similarly sized cargo area. Again, grocery bag holders right here, but you'll notice we do not have a door that opens and closes. We just have this fixed barrier. If we lift up the cargo load floor, you'll notice that we do have a novelty, and that is a donut spare tire. We also have some additional cargo room right down there. Thanks to this fold flat front passenger seat, these flat folding rear seat backs, we do get 9 out of 10 points in my exclusive trunk comfort index. We do lose 1 point because these seat bottom cushions are a little bit in the way. If these weren't in the vehicle, it would be a lot easier to fit bulky items and slide them all the way up onto this front passenger seat. But as it is, it's pretty easy to fit long IKEA furniture inside the Chevy Trax. Taking a detailed look at the inside, we have these large two-way adjustable headrests and height-adjustable seat belts in all models of the Trax for the front passengers. The LS model that we're taking a look at has the base upholstery. There is also an up-level upholstery package, and the LTZ gets faux leather. As you'd expect in a vehicle with a starting price like this, we do have an awful lot of hard plastics going on the inside of the cabin. The entire black portion of the door is all a hard touch plastic, as is this tan portion. This small armrest right here in the middle is actually more of a rubbery plastic than a soft touch plastic like you'd traditionally find in most vehicles in this segment. There are quite a number of storage bins in this cabin, however. We do have one small one there in that gray portion and then a larger one in the black portion of the door. The dedication to both hard plastics and a lot of storage space continues on the dashboard. We have one small glove compartment right here, USB port inside. See, I can fit glasses, a phone, a wallet inside that little storage cubby, and then we have a larger glove compartment right below it. I was able to fit an iPad inside there. All hard touch plastics all across the dashboard, black portion up here, tan portion here, and the black portion below it. Moving over to the center of the dashboard, we have yet another storage cubby right here. I was able to fit an iPhone and a wallet inside there as well, 2 large air vents, and then 2 interestingly shaped storage compartments right here. There is a rubber liner on the bottom to keep things from slipping around. If I go ahead and grab my phone, you can see that's about the size of that container. Moving on down the dashboard, all models have the standard touchscreen infotainment system. This system does offer smartphone integration and smartphone-based mapping. So if we click the smartphone link, we actually can get mapping software via Bringo, which is an app that you download on your smartphone. We also have TuneIn, Stitcher, and Pandora integration. This is actually one of my favorite infotainment systems in low-cost vehicles. It is very functional, it works very, very well. It's also very snappy. You really don't have any voice commands going on in this system, but it does offer pass-through voice commands to your smartphone device. If you want to know more about this infotainment system, go ahead and click that banner at the bottom of your screen, and you'll be taken on over to a dedicated video on this particular unit in another GM vehicle. Moving down the dashboard, we have single zone climate control. These 2 slots are card holders, as you can see right there, so you can put parking tickets, credit cards, or other cards in those 2 slots. 12-volt power port and another storage bin. Down here we have a very traditional automatic shifter. Manual mode is all the way down to the bottom, and then you use these buttons right here on the side of the shifter to command the manual mode. This is a true manual mode, so if you put it in M1, it will stay in first gear and it will just hang out there at the red line. Likewise, if you put it in 6th gear, it will just lug 6th gear. The only time it will shift for you is if you drop below the speed designed for that gear. So if you're in 6th gear, come to a complete stop, it will shift down to 1st. Between the front seats, we have not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 very large cup holders. One right up front, a square one right here behind the driver's arm. This is a cup holder, however, it still has these little bumpers to help hold the cup. And then we have 2 very large ones right here in the center as well. The driver gets a fold-down fabric-covered armrest, but the passenger doesn't have one on their side. Instead of the more traditional themed instrument cluster we see in the Buick Encore, the Trax gets what General Motors calls a motorcycle-themed instrument cluster. We have this tachometer right over here on the left-hand side, red line at 6,500 RPM, and then we get this disco dash portion over here on the right. You can see that the rest of this circle is completed by the fuel gauge. Instead of buttons on the steering wheel, that instrument cluster is controlled via the turn signal stalk. We have a ring that rotates right around here, set clear at the end, and a menu button right over here. This allows us to cycle through things like our average fuel economy. Keep in mind we have been doing a great deal of idling during this photo shoot. That really has dropped our fuel economy there. We also have average time, average speed, distance to empty, etc. Hitting the menu button on that stalk allows us to change a very limited set of vehicle settings like our units. You can change it to metric if you're in Canada. You can also see your oil life, and you can tell the vehicle to learn a new tire pressure. The steering wheel design is very similar to what you see in other Chevy products. This is a urethane wheel in this particular model. It's not leather wrapped. We do have sport grips right up here, some imitation perforated leather across this side and on the other side, and then again, the same sort of injection molding down here. The right side of the steering wheel is where you will find the audio buttons. We have volume up, down, track forward, backward, source change. We have a pickup and voice command button and a hang up and mute button right down here. On the left side of the steering wheel is where you would find the cruise control buttons if our model had them. These two spokes right down here are actually a soft touch plastic. To the driver's left, we have one more storage cubby right below the headlamp controls. Because we don't have a whole lot of power under the hood, 0 to 60 is a little bit leisurely. It comes in at 9.3 seconds for the Trax, which is essentially the same as the Buick Encore. There was, of course, a time where 9.3 seconds wasn't considered slow, but today 9.3 seconds is in the same window as the Prius and Prius C. Despite the slow time, however, this turbo engine has a decent amount of low-end torque, so it really doesn't feel quite that slow, especially out on these winding mountain highways. Handling comes in at 6 to 7 out of 10 points in the Trax. I'm comparing this mostly to the hatchbacks that you get in the subcompact category as well. So something like a Ford Fiesta hatchback is going to handle a little bit better than this. It really just has to do with the height of this vehicle. Something like a Chevy Sonic would also handle better than the Trax. Now the Buick Encore handles a little bit better. We have wider tires and we have slightly different suspension tuning in that vehicle. It helps it hold the corners just a little bit better. Even so, however, the Trax is very good. The subcompact category usually is very good in terms of handling. A lot of that has to do with the light curb weight. Most of these entries in this segment don't weigh an awful lot, and that really helps when it comes to handling. I'm going to give braking 7 out of 10 points. Fade resistance was very good, and stopping distances were actually a little bit shorter than I thought. The Trax is actually quite fun to drive out on these winding mountain roads. You'd think that a vehicle with 215 with tires wouldn't handle as well as this vehicle does, but the Trax really does handle quite well. The Trax handles fairly well out on these winding mountain highways. Even though the tires are a little bit narrower than I would like, the handling is still very good for this kind of vehicle. This definitely handles better than the next size category up. I was a little bit disappointed in the cabin noise score. This came in at 73 decibels at 50 miles an hour, which is notably louder than the Buick Encore. The Buick is very quiet out on the road. In general, Buick as a brand produces some very quiet vehicles, and that includes that low-end Buick Encore in their lineup. I haven't been able to drive the Honda HR-V yet, but this cabin is a little bit louder than the Jeep Renegade or the Nissan Juke. This is also louder out on the road than the top-end versions of the Kia Soul. With a light curb weight and a moderately firm suspension, the ride score comes in at 7 out of 10 points. This is not pillow soft by any stretch of the imagination, but then again, it really wouldn't fit the character of this vehicle if it was. The Buick Encore is ever so slightly softer, but it's not a huge difference. I think that perhaps the best ride in this segment is in the Jeep Renegade. However, the Renegade is a fair amount heavier than the Trax. That really shows in the way the vehicle behaves out on the road. It feels like a much larger vehicle, so if that's something that attracts you, then you might want to take a look at that Renegade. If you don't like that feeling, then stick with something in this weight category. At its heart, the Trax is a tall, subcompact hatchback, and that really is how the Trax feels out on the road. This doesn't really feel like your average crossover or your average sport utility vehicle. The steering is relatively direct. It is quite numb, however, just like every other vehicle out there with electric power steering, but it is an awful lot of fun to drive out on these winding mountain roads. All other things being equal, I would generally take the better handling vehicle over the better accelerating vehicle, and that's true for the Trax, and that translates to the Buick Encore as well. This vehicle handles very well. It feels very confident out on the road. It never feels unsettled over broken pavement. It's actually a decent amount of fun to drive out here. Of course, that being said, I wouldn't mind about 30 extra horsepower in this vehicle. It would make the Trax an awful lot more fun. I think I would prefer a manual transmission, of course, in this vehicle for the absolute amount of fun. You can get that in some of the competition, but a number of the competition does use a CVT, and that does suck a little bit of the fun out of things. So that would be the Honda HR-V and the Nissan Juke. They both use CVTs. Where the Trax really excels is fuel economy. I've been averaging 30.1 miles per gallon over about 500 miles of very mixed driving in this vehicle. That's a little bit higher than I got in the Buick Encore that I last tested, because that Encore was all-wheel drive. You'll notice that 30 miles per gallon is higher than the EPA score even in this front-wheel drive model. That's because we get excellent highway mileage in the Trax and in the Buick Encore alike, thanks to this very efficient 1.4-liter turbocharged engine. On a 50-mile trip from San Jose to San Francisco, I averaged over 40 miles per gallon in this front-wheel drive model, which is an incredible number. If you think that's a little bit unusual, going from San Jose to Sacramento in an all-wheel drive Buick Encore, I was able to average about 38 miles per gallon, which is also an excellent number in the all-wheel drive model. Pricing on the Trax is not as low as the competition and not as low as you might think. It starts out at $20,995 for the LS model that we're testing here. If you want all-wheel drive, you add $1,500. The important thing to keep in mind with the LS is you get exactly what we're looking at here. You don't get cruise control, and you don't get fog lights on the front. You also don't get alloy wheels or Sirius XM satellite radio that you will find on some of the competition or the upper-level trims of the Trax. If you want things like that, you have to step up to the $23,320 LT model, which gives you a little bit more chrome, the cruise control, XM satellite radio, alloy wheels, and more. The next step up is the LTZ model at $25,905. That gives you a faux leather interior, bigger wheels, the Bose premium audio, and rear park assist. All models do give you that color touchscreen infotainment system that we saw earlier. However, that's not uncommon in this segment anymore. Most of the options out there do have some sort of standard touchscreen infotainment system, except for the Jeep Renegade. If you add all-wheel drive and all the other options to your Chevy Trax, in the LTZ model you will end up at $28,530. What will likely be one of the volume players in this segment has not been priced yet, and it's the brand new Honda HR-V. The HR-V has been sold in other world markets for some time, but it's recently being introduced to the United States. The HR-V is likely going to be a little bit more expensive than the Chevy Trax, as is typical for Honda. However, the interior on the Trax is definitely a notch below the HR-V that I have been able to sit in at recent auto shows. Obviously, I haven't had the opportunity to drive the HR-V yet, but I don't expect it to be that much different from the Trax in terms of general road dynamics. It does have a CVT under the hood instead of a stepped automatic transmission, so there's definitely a preference going on there. But I did find the seats in the HR-V more comfortable, and the interior is definitely a notch above this. Obviously, you will pay for that because generally Honda does charge a premium for their slightly better interiors. Jeep's brand new Renegade has been priced, however, and it is going to start much less than this at just under $18,000. However, that Jeep Renegade does not have standard air conditioning or a standard automatic transmission, so it is decently decontented versus the Trax. Now, like the Trax LS, we don't have standard cruise control, but we do have a 1.4-liter turbocharged engine. If you get the automatic transmission in that Renegade, we get a more powerful, naturally aspirated engine. It's a 2.4-liter four-cylinder that's shared with the rest of the Chrysler lineup. It also brings a 9-speed automatic transmission to the party. Adding an automatic transmission and air conditioning to the Jeep Renegade will bring it up to $21,685, which is about $1,000 more expensive than what we're looking at right here. However, for that price tag, we get a vehicle with a more stylish exterior, definitely a slightly better quality interior, slightly more comfortable seats, and we also have cruise control, which we're not getting on this particular model. The Renegade is a very different subcompact crossover vehicle, very much like the Jeep Cherokee is a very different compact crossover vehicle, because both of those vehicles have sturdy four-wheel drive systems. And that's not something that you find in your average entry in this segment. The Renegade does have available locking differentials. It also has a low-speed transfer case and a stability control system that is designed for off-road maneuvering. Obviously, you will pay for the off-road ability, and the Trailhawk version of that Renegade that has those rugged off-road bits is going to be considerably more expensive than the Trax. You also get more top-end features in the Renegade than you get in most of the other entries in this segment, making that Renegade at the top end compete a little bit more directly with the Buick Encore, not the Chevy Trax. It does top out at around $33,000. Calling Nissan's Juke polarizing is putting it mildly. The Juke is definitely going for a particular style. It's not exactly my cup of tea. Some people find it dreadfully ugly. However, the Juke is also a very good value in this segment. Even though it starts only a little bit less than this, most of the versions of the Juke have about $1,000 more equipment than you'll find in the Chevy Trax. We also have an available manual transmission and more power out of its turbocharged engine. It's not quite as practical as this vehicle, especially in the back end where we don't get as much practical cargo capacity, but the Juke definitely is the best handling entry in this segment, especially in those sporty trims. Kia Soul also, however, is trying to compete with the likes of the Ford Fiesta, starting at $15,190. That's a very, very low base price when you compare it with the rest. However, you might almost say that there are two Souls sold in the United States. There's that cheap base model, and then there is the Plus and the Exclaim model of the Soul, which have a slightly nicer interior, some changes on the exterior, and definitely higher feature content. Value, however, is really where Kia plays in this segment, because when you take a look at the Soul Plus, same price as the model we're taking a look at here, which is the Trax LS base model, for that same price in the Soul, you get an 8-inch color touchscreen infotainment system with built-in navigation and all of Kia's latest software. We also get a leather steering wheel, we get automatic climate control, an up-level Infinity audio system, more comfortable seats as well. After driving this vehicle for a week, I just didn't seem to bond very well with it. I think that overall the vehicle is a good vehicle. I think the pricing is the problem in my head. I think that this would be a very good vehicle if it was about $4,000 less expensive. And that really is the core of my problem with the Trax. A number of reviewers out there have also complained about the power, the interior, or the exterior looks of the Trax. Again, I think those are all valid complaints as long as you insert the caveat that it's about the price, because if you took about $4,000 off this vehicle, then I think none of those problems would bother me at all. The lack of cruise control in this base LS model is definitely a problem for me, although I do like some of the convenient features we have, like that fold flat front passenger seat. The problem in many ways is that the Chevy Trax is supposed to be one of the value entries in this segment, and it really misses that by a great deal when you take a look at the Kia Soul. The Kia Soul is considerably less expensive, and as I said, if you price it similarly to the vehicle we're taking a look at here, it has an awful lot more feature content. This may sound strange, but I actually find the Buick Encore to be one of the most compelling entries in this segment, even though it's very closely related to the Chevy Trax. The deal there is that the Encore really isn't that much more expensive, but it's a much nicer vehicle inside and out. The Encore starts at $25,650, and that sounds like a huge bump over the Trax. However, most of the Trax models being sold will be the LT model, which is only $2,000 less than that Buick Encore. For that $2,000 difference, you get ambient lighting, you get leather steering wheel on that Encore, you also get XM satellite radio, a longer warranty, wider tires, better handling, a much quieter interior, a more grown-up interior that's also more comfortable. You also get more comfortable seats and a much more polished infotainment and navigation system. Personally, I also think the Buick is fairly attractive on the outside, and it doesn't lose any of the practicality that we get in the Trax. So we still have that fold flat front passenger seat, we still get a large amount of cargo room. Obviously, we still have the same 1.4-liter four-cylinder engine, which some people have complained is a little bit anemic, but for average driving, especially around town driving, it's really not a problem. However, the 1.4-liter turbocharged engine has a decent amount of low-end torque, so it really has no problem climbing hills, and it feels peppy around town. You'll just notice that it has a little bit less power than the competition in passing maneuvers or out on the open highway. My bottom line with the Trax is that with the pricing set the way that it is, this is not a model that I could recommend. If you're after the value entry in this segment, that would certainly be the Kia Soul. If you're after the off-road entry in the segment, that would certainly be the Jeep Renegade. But if you're after the best overall vehicle in this segment, in my mind, at the current time, that would actually be the close sister ship to this, the Buick Encore. I went back and took a look at my written review of the Buick Encore back when it was launched over at thetruthaboutcars.com. I was a little bit concerned that I had some sort of Buick puppy love thing going on, because my only comment about the Buick Encore was that I didn't know if I was ready to buy a Buick with a Buick logo on the front, but that everything else about the vehicle was really great. That caused me to check one out at a local Buick dealer, and in truth, I still think the Buick is one of the better entries in this segment. The interior is definitely more grown-up than the other entries that you find here. We do have some hard-touch plastics, but Buick has done a nice job of quieting that cabin down out on the road. They've also added an awful lot of soft-touch material that you don't find in the Chevy Trax. And again, it's only about $2,000 more expensive to jump up from the LT model of this to the base Buick Encore. Now, if you fully load your Buick Encore, obviously it will be one of the more expensive entries in this segment, but you also get features that you don't find in some of the entries. Thanks for taking the time to check out this video. Again, I'm Alex Dykes, and this has been the 2015 Chevy Trax. Go ahead and click on that subscribe banner at the bottom of your screen so you can be updated on all of my latest videos. You can also find me over at facebook.com/AlexNautos, over at Twitter as AlexNautos, and you can email your questions to alex@alexnautos.com. I'll see you next week.